up for an hour and something.
Did you have a good Thanksgiving?
Yeah, it's fine.
But it's one of the things, that you can do is you can do anything you want. I cooked a turkey, I was alone, cooked a turkey. I didn't eat it. Because I know what I cook like, and I'm not about to try that kind of stuff.
But you can see.
Yeah. Somebody else ate it. They'll be out of the hospital in 3 days. But think of the amount of weight they lost. Sure. You know? And you always say you gain weight during the holidays, not if you eat my food.
My sister-in-law cooked turkey. They're like, she has this like really expensive European stuff there. Their house is amazing. It's like 10,000. She like thought she was cooking it at like 4 something. She's like, it's only like 295. She was worried an hour. So I'd rather this fire came over and he had one that he deep fried. And I'd rather keep one that they had smoked.
Actually, I cooked one, and then on Friday, went to Palm Desert to have one that was cooked that day, and if it didn't work out, we had one. That was the same kind. All right, enough. All right, calling the Administration and Finance Committee meeting to order on December 1st, 2015. It is now 8:04, I think. And we all rise, and Kirsten, going to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Ready, begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We could have roll call. I guess Tim and I are here, and all of those who are on video are here. So roll call become necessary.
Kind of a moot point.
It's fine. But for purposes of that, have we covered roll call? Or?
Yes, that's done.
Okay. No public comments. Minutes of the meetings of April 28th, 5th, June 2nd, November 3rd. Tim, do you have any comments on those minutes?
Only comment was I thought we agreed to do the abbreviated minutes. Is that just going forward?
That was going forward from the last council meeting.
All right.
Including the last council.
Correct.
I have no questions other than just that comment.
Move approval, Lou?
Move approval.
All right, seconded, and then therefore approved, that is. Claims and demands, page 11.
I'll just go through it.
Whatever you want to.
Okay. First question on 22039, the calls green fee. What does green fee mean?
It's a fee that, sorry, that's a fee that every building permit is charged and paid to the state.
For what?
I'll have to get back to you. I know what it is, but for some reason it's blanking.
Okay. On the bottom of the page, the legal fees, are those going to stop pretty soon? When does that?
I believe this is the last invoice we received from Brad Pierce's firm.
So we won't be getting any more?
Correct.
Okay. Uh, 16, I believe there was one. The 13th on 22055, the $13,000 for the cleanup, was that was in addition to the monthly fees, or was that?
That was in addition to the maintenance. That was for the one time when they went through the road and had to clean up and take out all of the weeds and trash and debris and things like that.
Okay. We're looking at what, $60,000 a year and $13,000 on top of that. I'd like to take a look at the contract, so somebody can send me a copy of the contract. I have nothing else on 16, 17. There was one.
But I went to Kathy Bennett's retirement, and I didn't see anything, unfortunately. What is it that we gave her?
I believe it was like one of the curved glass that was engraved with the years that she worked in Canyon Lake.
They didn't have any presentations of anything other than outside of their own stuff.
And then fees, right?
That's what. On 22064, we got a reference to petty cash, and it says mileage. I thought mileage was spent, done with vouchers.
I think it should be on two different lines. Mileage was for a staff member's mileage, and then council snacks is a different one in certified mail.
But
So
don't-
mileage for city council's on expense sheets,
Right,
but if we have a staff member that has mileage that's, $10, $15 or something like that,
There should be a
we did it
comment.
through,
There should be a comment after
Cash.
mileage, and then council snacks, comma, certified mail.
okay, I'm not comfortable with the idea of procedure that varies. I would think that if we have a procedure in place for handling mileage reimbursement.
This is not council, this is staff.
I think
Wouldn't
he's
staff
saying
be-
he wants
oh,
staff
staff
to do
to
an
do
expense
what you do.
report as well.
I think they do, don't they, when they turn it around? They just
Well,
paid
in
it
the
with
petty cash, we paid it
Right.
out of petty cash, but if you go into that stack of items that came out of petty cash, there is a full report, like an expense report.
It's just not paid with a voucher, it's paid with petty cash.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with it being paid out of petty cash, but I would think that the procedure needs to be uniform no matter who does it. If it's paid out of petty cash, I don't care, but I just like to make sure that we're following the same procedure.
But we do have a report that shows the mileage and where they went, that we put in with the file for petty cash.
The same form
It's
that
paid
we
out.
do with vouchers?
Yes.
I think we only have
Same
one
expense
form.
report sheet.
Okay, all right. Let's see. Sorry, I should have put a mark by my thoughts. A little item, but place burned out bulbs, $55 on 22078. I would think that's something that we can,
The actual bulbs cost that much.
oh, it's the bulbs themselves.
The
Okay.
bulbs cost,
LED bulbs.
yeah, they're the high efficiency bulbs that we had when we replaced all the ballasts for energy efficiency in the building.
They're more expensive, they'll last longer.
Okay.
The cleanup then cost us more than that $40,000 if we take 22076. And that Tri-Lakes has some cleanup of
But
landscaping.
This was for the oversight, so it was for a landscape architect to go do the walk for the RFP. And then as they've had questions on our irrigation and things like that, that landscape landscape architect comes out and meets with them. So this is for that oversight in general.
While we're on this, do you mind if I do a segue?
I'll go ahead.
That, got this cleanup now, what about all the dead plants and everything that needs to be replaced or fixed?
We have invoiced the previous landscape company that was failing to maintain it while we were paying them about $50,000 for replacement of the plants that they killed. We haven't received payment on that. We've been following up. They obviously don't want to write a check for $50,000. But we'll get a quote from our new landscape company on what it's going to cost to replace all of that.
What does $4,800 buy us from Tri-Lake Consultants for this oversight on RFP?
I would have to pull it up. There was several hours work of the landscape architect because she helped go over the plans during the RFP, get the RFP together to go out for the services. She did the walkthrough, and then once we awarded the contract, she went out with the new contractor and actually walked the site and showed them how the irrigation works, because we have a pump that comes out of those ponds. So it's not a standard irrigation system. So she reviews that with them and everything.
One thing I would like when we eventually, hopefully, get new policies on purchases and contracting is that somebody on staff attest to a fair and reasonable price so we have a point of accountability that the price is reasonable for what we're paying for this kind of stuff. And if it's not fair and reasonable, or it's not determined that it can be evaluated to be fair and reasonable, that the issue come before the council to make those determinations where we're not sure that it's a fair price. Not that this isn't fair, it's just I don't know. And, I know that you ultimately have to prove that kind of thing, but I'm just, again, personally think that it would be a clear point of responsibility that says, yes, I've looked at the pricing of this and it appears to be fair, and if needed be, here's why, a note on it that we know that it's a fair price we're paying for.
This is based on the contract that we have with Tri-Lakes.
It's not a new contract?
No. No, Tri-Lakes is the engineering firm that we're
Right.
contracted with, and they sent out the landscape architect.
She is some of it.
I believe so.
And we're getting rid of Tri-Lake, so it's no longer going to be.
We have the RFP out, yeah, we'll talk about the RFPs later on.
That decision may be made in the near future.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just,
Okay.
I just
Go ahead.
have a chance to talk about this kind of thing, but supposedly we went in, supposedly, we do it Dawn, because she likes to talk to you people, and she doesn't look at the microphone. But I thought, spent a lot of money with the pumping system for the water, and spent a lot of money, as I recall, on doing that, and that the POA then mimicked what we did for their pumping system and that kind of stuff. Yet we still don't have a pumping system that's efficient.
We are putting in some isolation valves so that they can better clean it out. There's, the pipe that comes out of the ponds has an automatic flush on it. So that is working properly, but then when it comes up, you still get some of the algae growth and things like that farther up the pipes. And when they installed it, they didn't put isolation valves. So you have to actually shut off the entire irrigation system before you can clean out the little filters. So by putting in the isolation valves, they can just flip it off there, clean them, do that type of thing. And that should keep it running efficiently, but like any drip irrigation, you have to change the heads out, you have to do those little flushing, the little lines, stuff like that. And the previous contractor was not doing that.
This is chit chat. If you just punch me in a hole, God, there's thousands of little drip irrigation valves that can be replaced. Is there an automatic replacement like every 25, 50 feet? You get it a month, 6 months, a year or something?
You know, when they go through and they service those areas, they check to make sure that they're working, and if they're not working, they just switch them out. And then once a year, they go through and flush all the main line. But they check the irrigation heads and the smaller lines every time they service that area.
Is the new engineering company, Public Works Company, gonna be responsible to make sure the landscape companies keep on with that stuff? Is that part of their responsibilities?
Oversight of contracts would be something that
Okay.
would be the public works part of the services.
Same thing.
I probably asked this question before, but what's a State Water Resource Control Board? What do they do for us?
That's our MPDES permits.
That's our MPDES program with our permits. MPDES.
The National
Pollutant
Discharge
Discharge.
Elimination.
System. It's all part of that contract.
Is this a contract we enter into,
It's an annual permit that we have to get each year.
mandated by the state?
Yeah.
Are we clear on, again, I guess I don't know what we're paying for, what do we get out of this? Even though it's mandated, I'd like to know what it is.
We don't necessarily get something for this. This is the permit that requires us for all of the runoff in our storm drains, off of our streets, off of properties. We have to test it and make sure that there's no pollutants going into the storm drain. Every city has to do this.
Well, we do that, we pay somebody else to do the testing, right?
No, we have our special enforcement officers, they test the pH, they test to see if it has silt in it, things like that. If there's a spill, like if somebody washes out their concrete buckets and let it go down the curb, we go through and find them and clean up and make sure that they've cleaned up the site properly.
Okay.
We do a report every year, which is a very mandatory and touchy report.
Correct, we do a stormwater report every year.
We have to pay a permit for, what are we permitted to do from this permit?
To have runoff from our roads going to the storm drain systems.
Okay. I'd be curious, do we have any documentation on what this is? It just sounds like a lot.
I have a copy of our MS4 permit.
I'd be interested in getting a copy of that.
Okay.
It's not too much work.
No, I can email a PDF over to you.
Okay, that's all I have for claims.
Credit card review.
So we're here for this one. Is there, what page are we on?
I was just looking at something that
Okay.
you know,
Okay, I don't know what it is.
what was it, overview with see how many hours they did to just,
Is it flat, bottom line bill?
It looks like the sticky note where it says, can you give me info on what this is for, was covering what that invoice actually laid out.
oh, okay.
So if you're interested, I can pull a copy of it upstairs.
Well, it just,
Yeah,
and
it
of course, I
looks like
didn't see
it's
it
blank.
earlier, that,
It does.
it was $4,800 and it's,
It says reimbursable, so it's being passed, Habib paid it to the landscape architect, and now he's billing us. So we just need a copy of the landscape.
Yeah, I can pull it, what we have upstairs.
Again, well, if this is part of the base contract, but, you know, I would question the base contract, and we're, you know, it's,
We've had the contract, I think, since 1995. I believe this is when we did this one. The contracts really aren't shining stars in the contract world.
well, we're moving forward, so
Yeah.
I'm going to ignore it, but it's just strikes me as we're spending money without knowing that we're getting value for the money we're spending. That's what I'm concerned about. I'd like everything that we approve to be able to show that at least somebody's looked at the thing and says we're getting fair value for what we're spending.
Would you prefer, instead of me just initialing and dating that I've looked at them and approved them, would you prefer a stamp that states something like that?
I think it's worth considering, you know, when we look at the purchasing procedures, that we have somebody actually have to do something to say, yes, it's a fair value, whether it's a stamp or whether it's a special check box or what it is that.
Okay, we can order a stamp, it's no problem.
Well, it's, you know, it's more than a stamp too. It's
Right, no, I agree.
accountability.
Before we go through any of these, I mean, there was a couple months when our planning firm had their invoices sent back to them because they weren't charging us what was in the contract.
Yeah,
So before I sign off on any of these, I go through and look and make sure that it's according to the contract or it's not an outrageous price.
yeah.
So we can put a stamp on it and then I can sign off
Yeah,
that way.
yeah. And I guess the same applies to entering into a contract. You know, if we go into a contract, we need to have somebody say the price we're committing to is a fair price, not just the payment, but
Yeah, but contracts all come to the city council, and that's part of the review, and then in the staff report.
well, not all contracts do. We got renewals all the time that come up that you know,
Okay.
I mean, I haven't seen hardly any contracts come before the council. We got dozens and dozens of contracts.
Right, and they're just automatically rolling over, but that's part of the contract terms, so.
Well, I don't think that automatic rollover should be automatic in a lot of these cases. I know we've talked about, you know, engineering things, but, you know, it's, I think that my preference would be that every contract we have out there, you know, be brought before the council to review, to take a look at. I know that sounds arduous, but it's,
But there are some cities, like, as part of the budget, they redo all the contracts for that next year through the budget process, which is the terms. I mean, we could do something like that every budget cycle.
I would like that, just so that we have a clear understanding of what contracts, and you've got, you know, things change, technology changes, competitive environment changes.
They don't necessarily rebid them every year, they just bring them back and make the council aware, and then a new one-year term, so.
Right.
Well, that's, yeah, just so that the council has an input onto the way the contracts are handled. I'm not necessarily saying you should rebid everything, that might be arduous and redundant, but especially on larger contracts, you know, again, it's the point of accountability. I don't think that you should be the point of accountability on every dollar that's spent around here. You know, the council needs to assume some of the responsibility directly, and two, I think that for some of the smaller value purchases, you know, you don't need to be the kind of, you know, you should be able to delegate that, the role of looking at the pricing of these things and make sure that you know, that there's some sense and reason to the pricing, but still have a point of accountability and somebody is looking at it. Okay, I'm sorry, I have to ramble.
This page 34 is the only credit card information, page 34. Is that correct?
Correct, there's only 3 charges this month.
I had a question on the Office 365 agreement, the contract.
Yes.
Is, now for instance, on my laptop or something, I would like to have 365 as the, does that agreement cover people on the council and things?
Yes, what, you can install Office, the Office products on, I think it's like 4 or 5 devices per account. So if you put it on your laptop, it wouldn't charge us anymore. However, if you put it on your laptop and you take your, say you have an older version, it takes that off, puts the new one on. If for some reason your account is no longer active with the city, it would take it off of your computer and make it invalid. So you would have to find your subscription and do all of that. So I would save the numbers if you do it.
Okay.
Well, that's why he's gonna run for council again next year, so you can have Office 365.
Is there something special, we need passwords or keys or something to do that?
The same password you use to log into your email. When you log in, it gives you a few options like to look at your mail or to do some other things. You just go into the office products and download. I can show you how.
Okay, all right, all right, you can show me how, appreciate it, I'd like to get that since it's.
Yeah, it doesn't charge us any more than just having an email account anyways.
Okay. While we're talking about computers, just a quick side, do we have a SharePoint with Exchange?
Yes.
We do have a
No,
SharePoint.
it's called OneDrive, but yeah, you can upload documents into it and share it virtually.
The SharePoint is an actual, what I'm talking about is an actual server. So you can put, a SharePoint server means that you have a thing that runs applications for multiple devices. I was wondering if that, I think that's part of Exchange.
I think it depends on what price level for your account, so I'd have to look and see if SharePoint is part of that.
Because one thing, for instance, it might be worthwhile to, if you put up the spreadsheets on SharePoint, you can automatically, for travel expenses, that kind of thing, you do it on a SharePoint, it consolidates. Some sort of consolidated information. I'm just curious whether it's part of the package or not. It happens to be programmed a little bit, but it's a fairly minor thing to do, but if it's, it might, I'd just like to know whether it's within our
I'll
capabilities.
take a look at it.
All right.
Part of the thing, Jim's much more of this, I think I'm pretty good on computers and stuff like that, but I have OneDrive and I have no idea what the hell to do with it. So there may be some things that we need to educate ourselves on, and you understand OneDrive. It's on my phone.
It works
System
pretty much
drive.
like Dropbox. It's like a virtual place you can save it in cloud.
Just so that if we, but it's my understanding, and I could be wrong on this, but years, that for instance, if we had a SharePoint, not using OneNote or OneDrive, the SharePoint is automatically configured so that only people within
That group.
that
can
group
use it.
can use it.
It probably, yes.
Which makes
Because it's like a
little bit-
business account and anybody on that business account can get into it. But I think if somebody makes changes to it, so if we put a form up and somebody accidentally makes a change to it, it would overwrite that whole file.
I think that what happens there is it automatically does backups because the SharePoint's,
It may.
that's
We'll have
one of
to
the
look
reasons,
into it.
yeah, that makes it a little easier than something that's public and you don't have to administer it. Everybody's got the same page with the Exchange account.
Yeah. We'll look into it
All
and
right.
see if we can put some forms and things up.
Okay, moving on to financial statements on page 35.
So why are we so significantly under running budget?
For what?
Expenses.
Timing. The biggest one is the police department. I based it on how they billed us last year, but they're like a month and a half behind from last year. So that's the biggest one.
Okay, so a month and a half's roughly 200,000, a little less than that. Okay, so that puts it about,
And then we had several months, I believe, 2 months with no admin services position there that was budgeted.
Budgeted for the whole year, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I think some of the problem with the city council, and I think there's some charges between that and then the city managers are, I think there's some of the dues we've paid up front in July. I think some of those are misclassified, so I gotta go find those. That's what I'll do today. But the big reason we're a little under is the police department. And I based it on how they billed us last year, and they're a little bit behind, which is fine, because we do earn a little bit of money on when they don't bill us that time. So,
All right. Just a quick comment on the accounting of something like attorney's expense. I know that we had unusual attorney expense this year. Would it have been better and more appropriate to have a separate item in the chart of accounts for unusual attorney expense, or something that was, so that we segregate our normal ongoing operations expenses from our,
yeah, I've seen that in lots of places where they have normal and then special. We can add a separate line item, it's not that big a deal, so we can do that and then
I think
move
that
those costs.
that would be the one item that I would, speaking of chart of accounts, can we get a copy of the chart of accounts
Yeah.
of this thing?
Yeah.
Just so we know, so I know what I'm talking about. But anyway, it might be helpful to budget with the special attorneys thing, so we know that.
Yeah, so we have a chart of accounts we can print out. What we could do is separate the city attorney into 2 line items and just put a footnote on this page. Say, this portion is regular, this portion was special.
Okay. However you want to do it, I'm just wondering though, on terms of, if we're looking at budgeting, if we're using the chart of accounts as a method of establishing, next year's budget, that we can explain it fairly easily, but I'm wondering if it was a specific item on that chart of accounts, we would probably discuss it during the budget period. And it might not be
I think what we had in the budget was, and I could be wrong, but I think we had like normal charges and then we had the extra below it. And so kind of in the middle of the page and a total to that, but we can definitely separate it out in the future.
okay.
And we usually get what Betsy, the annual charge was like 45, 50,000 a year is what it was running. And so anything over that, we can separate out.
Well, I guess the complication would be if Betsy was involved in an unusual, the circumstance would dictate unusual costs.
Yeah, we can do that also. We can do the general plus the unusual. We can separate her bill because they give their bill broken out by, so if there's a case on their bill, it's usually separate.
Okay.
So we can break that out, no problem.
Do you have any thoughts on that? I'd like to see a separate line item in the chart of accounts. Identifies special attorneys.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that. It makes a lot of sense because you have so many unknowns with possible lawsuits and stuff.
Okay, is that fairly easy?
That's real easy to do.
Okay.
Okay, quarterly investment report, Charlie, got anything?
No, just the usual. We're earning, about the same percent. We do have, most of our investments now are fairly close to fair market value, so we don't have that big fluctuation at the end of the year. And so I think we're progressing nicely.
On the Federal Home Loan Bank series, we're getting it's a small amount, but we're getting a 5% return, which strikes me as unusual. Do you have any idea what's going on with that one?
It was purchased a while back, and we bought it at a super high premium. And so the effective rate was a lot less than that.
Oh, okay, so it's just, that's the
Right.
coupon rate.
And this is one that pays interest and principal monthly, and it fully matured in October of this year, so it's gone.
All right. Okay.
See what we bought, that was July 11.
Okay, Okay, moving on then to review of the request for proposal for Public Works Building and Safety Planning and Engineering Services. Ariel?
Okay, so we put out the RFP and we received several responses, which I believe we provided to you guys previously to review and make comments on. And we were going to schedule interviews for the 3 firms that were responsive fully, that provided all of the services for all those departments. We ended up interviewing 2 of the firms. The 3rd firm was very difficult to get a hold of. By the time they finally called us back after several phone calls and messages, we had already scheduled the interviews. And so we met with Wildan and Charles Abbott. And we do have a follow-up with Charles Abbott because they, we're gonna have a subcontractor come in for the planning services. So we were waiting to meet with that person so we can discuss our city with them. And if you guys have any questions or comments on the 2 firms that were interviewed.
Was that the green?
HR Green, yes.
Okay. That's the one we're talking about?
The HR Green is the one that we had a very difficult time getting a hold of to have them come in and interview.
Okay. My take on this was that Wilden and that were the only ones that were really responsive. You thought the other?
Charles Abbott did all of these services and they listed a planning rate, but they didn't specifically call planning out. So
Okay.
they were going to bring in a subcontractor. So we were waiting to meet with that subcontractor.
Okay. At this point in time, based on the discussions you're having with them, do you believe that both firms to be responsive to them?
Yes.
You do? Okay. And do you have any personal exceptions in your review of the qualifications?
Not in the qualifications, but after the interviews and things, I personally am leaning more towards Charles Abbott.
Really? Interesting. Can you elaborate?
We currently have Wildan, and there were several questions that I asked during the interview regarding some of the issues we've come across during their service in building, and they really weren't answered to my satisfaction.
Interesting. Can you elaborate more?
Well, we discussed the turnover of staff. We've had, I think, 5 or 6 staff members at the counter doing our permits in the past year. And having somebody for 2 or 3 months and turning over has led to plans being lost and incorrect charges being charged. And when I brought that to their attention, they really didn't have, I asked, what would you do to be proactive in preventing these types of things from happening again? And there really was no response. And some of the people that were there interviewing didn't know that those types of things had been happening, even though they were supposed to be overseeing our current contract. So that was concerning to me.
Yeah.
And Abbott, did you talk to Abbott about that as a possibility and what might happen with them?
We did.
The consistency.
Right, we did. And we discussed with them consistency in staffing and how would they make sure we were adequately staffed. I believe Charles Abbott is also for building permit processing. They're proposing to keep 68% of any building fees collected, and Wildan keeps 75% of anything collected. So they were lower, and they proposed additional work hours.
Do we have any idea whether their rates would be that we charge? Are they aware of the rates that we're charging right now?
Yes,
And they assume 68% of the current rate?
correct. And if you look at the hourly rates between Charles Abbott and Wildan for, say, public works, planning, engineering, they're pretty similar. They fluctuate, some of them are a little bit higher, some of them are a little bit lower, so they kind of balance out in that manner.
You think that so you think it's a coin toss in terms of the economics?
Yes. And then we would have the advantage of the 68% versus the 75% of building fees collected.
Have we looked at the issue of the just charging, collecting and then reimbursing hourly rate versus charging as a percentage?
I would have to go through and work that out, so I will do that.
Okay. I'm somewhat concerned that we don't have more analysis on the number of, an estimate comparison in terms of costs between the two companies. What would be the bottom line? I'm not sure we need it if you think it's a toss-up, but, we're talking a lot of money and a lot of commitment here. And I'm not sure that it would warrant some additional research to make sure that we're really sure that we're not committing ourselves to a higher value. It looks like about, I don't think
Well,
I'm comfortable totally with that.
one, if we try to look at engineering hours, our engineering costs, no matter what firm we choose, is gonna be higher than what we have now, because really, engineering is not charging us, what do we get, like a $2,000 bill, maybe every other month right now? They're not overseeing any of our public works items. I'm going out and tromping in the mud with the contractors, so we're gonna see an increase in that simply for the fact that we will actually be getting engineering services.
Would it be possible ideally, certainly negotiable on this, we have a spreadsheet that identifies hours or costs, current actual costs by department, and then, or budgeted, it doesn't even matter, by department, and then try to guesstimate hours worth of work by department, and just apply the same rate factors based on that guesstimate to come up with a
Future cost.
not budgeting for that necessarily, but just a swag at what you think the hours were, and then applying the rates, and, right all over it, not to be considered as budgetary, but used for comparison purposes only kind of thing.
Sure.
So that we have a means of comparing, but it clearly identifies that this is not necessarily what we think it's going to be right now. It's just established to do some sort of financial
Yeah,
comparison.
with all these different things, you couldn't get too exact, especially with the engineering, because they're not doing anything. But you could do, here's the hours we estimate, here's the hourly rate, and then buy both contracts, is what you're saying?
Correct,
Okay.
so that we can do some sort of a side by side, even if it's not accurate in the sense of being accurate in terms of the hours estimate, at least it'd be a means of evaluating the comparative bottom line on what we swag the hours to be. Does that make sense?
Yeah, we can put together a chart.
Okay. Would that be something, if we go forward with this to the, okay, let's, if you don't mind, I'm talking too much, you gonna shut me up?
No.
I assume we're talking about going forward with this in the January council meeting?
Correct.
Okay. I'm wondering, it sounds like if you are satisfied with the responses that you get from the other firm, what's the name again?
Charles Abbott or Will Down?
Abbott,
Okay.
that you're leaning in that direction, it sounds like, based on, that you would present this to the meeting on the January meeting?
Yeah, we would have the chart with the cost comparing it, and then staff's recommendation and the reasons why that recommendation is being made.
Do you think it's worthwhile for John and I to interview these people since they're such a big part of the city?
I wouldn't be opposed to it.
I would say you could do that if you wanted to, sir, but I don't think I'm qualified to do that, do the interview process. I would just suggest that, if you want to, I would happy to be sitting with you and do that. I know that I could ask many relevant questions. I don't know that I ever do, but that I would be able to do as well as they have. Let me just finish my thought on that. That comparison, how long would that take to do?
It wouldn't take very long.
My concern that we have is that, if you don't mind, that we would have a meeting, finance meeting. This won't change tomorrow night, but the finance meeting before the normal finance meeting, so you can get an approval from the finance committee, so that you don't have to necessarily have all of that in the staff report unless.
Well, I think somebody's gonna ask the bottom line. I think it's a chart.
Because you could have that in there, but that we could meet ahead of that, so that it's not the day before.
Okay.
The day before, and you have to prepare the budget or the
Council.
the agenda several days before, and so.
Plus, I think it would be wise, I know you perceive yourself as a short timer here,
No.
nothing to lose,
No.
but I don't think it'd be wise to have you be the total point of accountability on something as large, significant, and important to the city as this. So I think that, if we walk into the council meeting, in agreement on things, so it's not all on your back on who the appointment would be. So I think it'd be worthwhile for John and I to at least have some sort of discussion with these people so that we can say that we've interviewed them too.
Okay. We've already gone through the full interviews and presentations with Will Dan and Charles Abbott. We've only called back Charles Abbott for an additional interview because they were gonna bring the subcontractor they were gonna have for planning.
Why
Did
don't
you wanna talk to Will Dan as well?
I don't think so at this point. What I would suggest is that they're, at this point, you would perceive them to be your recommendation, and that we validate, more of a confirmation process than anything else. That
Okay.
We had reviewed, agreed with your recommendation, had an interview, and,
Okay.
are fully on board. I just don't want to see you to be the point without, because anything goes wrong.
Oh, I
they'll
know,
point you.
yeah.
And
Well,
at least this
no.
way they can point in 3 directions rather than one.
Well, and that's part of the concerns with the responses that we received when I was interviewing Will Dan. When you have lost plans, incorrect charges, high turnover in staff, and I say, I know it's hard to keep part-time people, but what are you gonna do to stop all this from happening? And to not really get an answer. That's what was really concerning, because ultimately when plans are lost over there, there's people in my office,
Yeah,
and that's not good.
yeah.
And they should be irate.
Oh, absolutely, and if they were my plans, I would be irate. So,
Okay,
so we'll put together kind of a cost comparison. We do have Charles Abbott coming in, so I'll provide you with the date and time that they've been scheduled to come back in. And then we'll call a special finance committee meeting prior to the regularly scheduled, so that can be reviewed. Oh, Charles Abbott is next Monday, what time?
I can look it up, it should be.
Oh, let's see.
Could we do a special meeting so?
Now,
on
did both want to sit in?
that? I don't think so.
Do we want it to be a public meeting?
Does it have to be?
Yes.
I think,
well, with the number of people here,
yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think that's a problem of getting that stuff out. I don't think anything that would be said would be. Are you concerned about the fact that Will Dan is won't be here and it's public, or that the public can hear any questions we have?
Well, not necessarily that, but typically when you're doing just the interviews, you don't have like a public meeting where they're coming, and then the public would have the opportunity to ask questions and do things as well.
Well, you can call it negotiations and make it executive,
We
but
can't do that unless it's council.
what's that?
We can't do that unless it's a city council. The committee doesn't have closed
Doesn't
session.
have closed session capabilities.
I don't really think anybody's gonna show up.
I don't see.
No, but we broadcast everything as
Monday
well.
morning that anybody's going to.
No, the only issue I would, legally, I know federal procurement regulations. I've read everything that I could find on state procurement regulations, but my question would be on whether or not selecting one of the one of the three responsive contractors for discussion is authorized. I think that might be worth talking to a lawyer about.
Right, well, the reason why we've asked Charles Abbott to come back is because we wanted to know who the planning subcontractor would be. So we
Understand.
needed that
Yeah.
information. It's not necessarily negotiations or selecting one over the other at this point. There wasn't the planning person here for us to talk to.
Yeah, I understand that, but, we're adding a new wrinkle into this thing.
Yes.
That I think I still think it sounds like a plan to me to be a part of. I don't want to see you as the point person, making what's a huge decision for the city, without, somebody backing you in that. And more than just backing you from, looking at this stuff, but actually have been involved in the process. I think that would be ill-advised. And I also think that we might be running into procurement law problems. So I think maybe it's worth talking to Betsy or somebody to find out if there's an issue if John and I are part of an interview of only one of the responsive suppliers.
Right.
And kind of key it off of her response to that. Are you comfortable with that?
I would say that, from my opinion, that taking everything that you said, that we should schedule the meeting for next Monday, if possible, and that you're going to have with them, that we just have 5, 10, 15 minutes of that time, then you can have your own time with them, whatever.
And do
And
you-
as long as Tim's concerns don't say that we can't do it.
Is that, you comfortable with that? You look like you're shaking your head a little bit.
I'm gonna
If you
check
have some
with,
questions, so go ahead and say.
well, I'm gonna talk to Betsy, because if we're doing it as an open meeting with only one of the firms coming to the open meeting to talk to the finance committee, is at that point gonna look like we're awarding the contract, and that invokes the 3-day challenge to it, et cetera, and that's quite a long time before. I don't know if we can get rolled down.
I think they don't want to show up in this one.
Maybe we talk about it offline, Betsy.
Yeah, let us talk to Betsy and see, and then I'll email you guys what we can do.
But I don't want to say, somehow or another, I don't want you to point for everything. This is probably one of the biggest decisions this city's made in a long time.
Right.
And, people don't realize how important this decision is. I don't think it should be totally on your shoulders.
And if necessary, we'll do it, has to be invited to,
Whatever, yeah, but I think covering our bases here is warranted because it's such a big, it really is a significant issue.
so if you invite both of them, then your questions,
Well-
of what we're asking them are less severe areas.
It would
Trying to read
be,
your facial.
yeah.
I would personally, if we can express our preferences going forward to Betsy, see if preferences work. I would rather have this be a process of confirmation rather than evaluation. You know, in other words, you made a decision, and we're just confirming.
What if, when we call the special meeting, when that recommendation's being made after the second interview and things, when we make the final decision as staff's recommendation to the council, then we call that special meeting, have the chart comparing everything, and we'll ask that contractor to come in.
But then you've got to go back to the council to get final contract approval.
Right.
So it'd be you're delaying things a month.
No, we can just do it like we were talking about, having it not the day before, but maybe the week
okay.
before or something. Well, no, because that falls into the 2 weeks that were closed.
Yeah.
Do it before the 17th.
Well, if we're doing a special meeting for fire RFP in mid-January, maybe we can bring it to the regularly scheduled January Finance Committee and put awarding the contract at the mid-January meeting, where we're gonna have to do the award of the contract for the fire consultant as the council moves forward with that RFP.
It's just a matter of timing.
Whatever you think's best, I'll be comfortable with, but
But the whole intent of this is not to have it all on your back.
Right.
Okay, so whether it's the 1st of January or the 15th of
Right.
January, I don't think you care.
I think that sounds best, I think, is to have us go through this final interview where we're meeting the actual planning consultant that they're subbing out. And then we'll get the chart together and, you know, granted that the planning subcontractor doesn't have any big issues. We'll make our recommendation based on that. Bring that to finance committee during the regularly scheduled finance committee, which would be right the first week of January. And then when we do our special city council meeting mid-month is when we'll award contract.
okay, but again, we're talking about people from the council talking to these people about
Yes,
contracts.
yeah, so when we bring the recommendation and the chart to the finance committee, whoever we're recommending will also come to the finance committee meeting, give you guys the opportunity to have a discussion with them and do that confirmation.
All right. You comfortable with that?
Yes. I just thought she wanted to have it done for the first meeting in January, so I was just trying to push that. Okay. So we all know what we're doing with that? Okay, utility tax. I just have a concern on page 130 as to what went on in October.
Oh,
Well, I think what that is, because this is the month it's for, not the month received. They're always a month late. We receive October. I think when they did the schedule, they just took what was recorded through that date in the GL account through November.
well,
So it's not the whole month, it's just what was collected through that date.
right, we hadn't received Edison, which is a really large one that we get, because we had to prepare this on, what day was it, like the 17th, and it's not due till the 20th?
We prepared it a week earlier, so
Yeah,
it's timing, so, because this is
Well, my
what the
concern,
month was for, not the date collected.
my concern wasn't and it's fine if it's our timing, if it's something that we didn't get from them, then it's a whole different issue.
right, they weren't late, we prepared it before the due date, so we had received some, but definitely not all of them.
Okay. And I had asked about solid waste and how we'd be getting that kind of money from them, and there wasn't anything. But I come to find out that solid waste does charge monthly basis on dumpsters for condos and businesses and stuff like that. So this residential trash, I guess that's only the
Tax
on the
rolls.
tax things. And others is not on a monthly basis.
So that's why we see a little bit of trickle on the
Right.
large amounts.
So if I pay my taxes, which is,
The 10th, 9 days.
we'll be making a lot of money. Tim, any
Thanks for
concerns on the UUT?
No.
Oh, and the idiot that did this form made a mistake.
What's his name?
page 130. I could change it online, wouldn't do any good for what you have. The fourth quarter on page 130 for the water is incorrect. It's adding something in there. It should be October, November, December into the fourth quarter, which can't be $174,000.
That'd be a really good quarter.
Yeah, so you're only getting 28 for 1 month. So you can fix that, can't you? Okay. At least I caught my own error. Okay. Comments, sir?
Yeah, I do anticipating that I spent last year on the council. I've got some objectives I established when I started running for around here. One was the county, which was establishing some sort of an overhead account. And I think that's especially important now that we're looking at looking for state and federal monies, or federal money specifically, fund for fire and potentially police protection. If we don't meet cost accounting standards requirements, we're not going to be allowed to charge indirect costs against our proposals for direct costs for fire protection. And I would think that establishing an overhead account, an overhead grouping would be fairly simple. It seems to me, I'm probably naive and wrong on this, but if we simply took out the cost of, we take all of this building's costs and take out code enforcement, and we consider that a direct cost, then it seems to me everything else that we do, other than police and fire, would be an indirect cost, because everything else is contracted. We take out the contracts, we take out.
Well, I think like Ariel's time and Kirsten's time could be direct charges if they're actually working on the program. So you would have those direct charges.
But we don't, but now we've got to worry about timekeeping systems that I don't think we're keeping right now.
But the council's time obviously would be, part of the overhead.
Yeah, but why would we be looking at direct charging, administrative time when we don't have a timekeeping system in place that allows us to do that, as far as I know?
Well, if you have a cost allocation plan, you have to have the time, because you have to have some way of charging that time to the plant, so it'd be based on
Yeah,
hours spent.
But
or-
if they're totally indirect, if their time and, basically everything around here is an indirect cost to, for the betterment of all of the direct cost services, you'd simply use an allocation to establish, that rate against the direct, the direct cost services. So just now we don't have to worry about timekeeping systems. We don't have to worry about.
I think anytime you charge to a grant, whether indirect or direct, there has to be valid timekeeping
We do it
system.
We do it for code enforcement and special enforcement, specifically for NPDES and abandoned vehicles and things, where they specifically call out hours worked on those specific projects.
And that would be direct costs that's associated with the contract. It would have to be part of the exclusion, from the indirect pool. But that doesn't mean that your time is not used to support those activities and police and fire and everything else. And I don't see where it's that difficult of an allocation to make.
Are you talking a full A87 cost allocation plan approved by the feds?
Well, it'd be in a position so that we can claim that we can get there if we need to, that we have a basic cost allocation plan in place that says, here's our rationale for our cost allocation. If you want us to go through and I know they're going to play this game. They'll let you get away with a lot of stuff if you're not a big player in the game. And if we have something that we call a cost allocation plan in place, I think we'd be eligible for those indirect costs. If we don't, claiming that we're moving in the directions to get, full cost accreditation, cost accounting accreditation, I think they'd let it get away with this as provisional on indirect claims. And I just don't see it being that complicated to set up that bundling and say we have a cost count, an indirect cost count.
It's not difficult, but if you do a full 887 cost plan, there is layers in it, and you have to have bases for charging like the building square feet, you know, for the electrical. Kirsten, her time would be based on time spent, so you'd have to have an allocation based on that. But no, it
again,
could be
isn't
done.
Isn't that, can't we say it's all cost allocation? I mean,
Not sure.
this building supports.
The building would fall under that, and you would allocate it based on square
And
foot.
I would say there needs not be any direct cost associated with any of the administrative services. I just don't see where we can't say, you know, all administrative costs are overhead, including facilities, everything. Just exclude the things that we currently know. to
Which would be the contract cost.
Yeah. And then it's not a big deal of making the allocation. If the feds wanted to come in and say, well, we've got tweak this, tweak that, you know, they could, but, you know, I worked with them, they just don't do it. You know, they're not gonna nitpick on a cost allocation plan against a little, you know, a little tiny contract that really has no significant, you know, adjustment, you know.
Yeah, definitely we could you could do a cost allocation plan. But I don't know, would you use it all year long and start allocating a separate
Yeah,
account?
Just group, you know, identify things that are clearly direct, and then everything else would be.
So everybody's salary other than the code enforcement is an indirect cost?
And the things that, you mentioned something else other than code enforcement.
But this would only
That's
be
part of
if
Code
we,
enforcement does for ABA programs.
I would say code enforcement is probably a direct cost.
this would only
That's what they
be
do.
if you had a grant.
No, but we need to establish that cost account.
Right, establish it now, but if you had a grant, you'd say, here's the overhead we want to charge.
Right.
But not doing our budget, not monthly accounting, taking Ariel's costs and
No,
splitting it between 7 departments.
Everything else remains the same. In fact, the splitting doesn't really, you know, happen, you know, in a budgetary or presentation framework. The only place it happens on the cost, you know, the cost allocation.
And that's easier than having to redo the budget to take out that.
Well, there's a change in the OMBs, they've kind of rolled them all into one, and there's new guidance on all that. So it takes effect in December of this year for us for next year.
Yeah.
And so I think there's new cost allocation plan models in there, so we can take a look at that.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
And you definitely want to be able to charge the grants as much as you can.
Yeah.
Right, but I mean, you're limited, because if you had like a fire grant, you'd have your direct costs, and usually admin's limited to 10%. But still, 10% is better than nothing.
10% is better than nothing, but I, you know, commonly, and I did this was, you know, 20% was our, if you don't have a cost allocation plan in place,
Then you're
you're giving
limited.
20%. And this was back when you could get away with that crap. But, you know, now, they don't let you get away with it, and so, you know, you've got to have something that identifies, you know, your cost accounting centers so that you can, so you have some reasonable basis for your allocations. And, you know, you just,
Yeah.
total costs, I mean, it doesn't have to be that simple, it might have complicated as far as I'm aware, you know, I know there's new regulations coming out. But, you know, if you take all your costs, you strip out police, you strip out fire, you strip out code enforcement, you know, divide by the totals of those against everything else, you know, you got a cost allocation.
Yeah, that's no problem, unless, if you have to have it approved by OMB, that adds another layer to it.
Yeah, but you don't have to have it approved unless things have really changed to get a provisional.
Okay.
If you say you've got a cost allocation plan in place, here's our cost allocation plan, we want a provisional approval, you know, you've got to come in and tell us we're doing something wrong. And the reality is, they don't have the time or the resources to come in on somebody like us and take a look at our cost allocation plan. You know, they'll let a provisional go forever because, you know, it's not enough money to worry about it.
Yeah, we can definitely do that.
And as a matter of fact, I think there's a threshold, at least it used to be when I was playing, $1 million contracts,
Yes.
that you didn't have to go through the four
Right.
cost accounting standards crap,
Right.
unless you had a contract over $1 million. And if we get $1 million contract, we can afford to look at
More cost to it,
allocation
yeah.
standards.
Definitely, it's something that could be done.
Okay.
We'd have to obviously take a look at Ariel's time, Kirsten's time, and see how they spend their time. and come up with a formula, but it's doable.
But what's wrong, what am I missing here? Why do we have to take a look at their time? Can't it just be allocated?
I mean, how you allocating it to fire? What percent of her time does she spend on
Just
fire?
based on the percentage of cost. Just, cost of fire is 1,000,008.
Well, see, you're allocating it based on costs. There's different formulas,
Yeah,
like buildings a square foot.
Yeah, I'm
Some
just
things are
trying-
based on salaries.
I'm just trying to keep it as simple as I can. And it's my experience that, if that's a legitimate allocation basis, total costs, which keeps it really simple.
So you would say the total cost of the police contract, the fire contract,
All
all your contracts,
direct
because
costs.
you're basically overall the
Yeah,
department.
yeah.
So-
And then just divide by the difference between those contracts and the total cost, and you've got cost allocation.
I mean, that's one formula that would work probably.
Okay, I'm hoping to look at this.
Total cost and that percentage equals more than what my department is charging everything right now.
It should be okay. Because we're only gonna do this if we have a grant, we're not gonna
Yeah, it
change.
changes nothing, it's just, it's cost accounting is a side issue to normal accounting, so you just have to make sure that you're bundling in such a way
Just has to make sense,
that, yeah.
and that's one way to make sense would be the total cost of the
And
contract.
the big thing they don't want is to be changing it, that's where the monkey business happens, you've got one cost allocation plan for this grant, another cost allocation for this grant, and the reason that they go through the whole process of, you submitting your cost allocation plan is just so you're not juggling costs on a different basis for different contracts. It really has less to do with, is it an Einstein plan, and more to do, are you cheating the system by changing your cost allocation plans from one contract to another?
Yeah. We would have separate things for accounting, separate
Yeah.
things for Kirsten, separate things for aerials, and just depends.
Okay. However, well, I would really like to take a look at that if you're in agreement with that, because that's something that I think down the road can generate far more money than it would be, especially now that we're entering into the fire and potentially the police contracts where there's a lot of direct, grant money available. Okay? Comfortable with that?
Yes, sir. I'd like to take the next 5 minutes total time, to discuss three items on the agenda for tomorrow night. One, I just wanted to say that I wanted to pull the emergency preparedness, the drought, the El Nino thing, because I think people should hear what people are doing. And I don't think that's fair to have people do all that kind of work and you just put it in consent and no one knows anything about it. So be prepared to give you a report on that. Okay. The other thing, Tim has 2 things on there. One is on the consent agenda that we can't get any stipends for all of that. So that's just by the board. By the board.
Well, I talked to Ariel about it. She talked to Betsy, and I was questioning the word statute. I knew it existed, but I was assuming that statute meant our statute. But Betsy's interpretation is that it means state statute. So we can't get around it as far as she's concerned. That we can't compensate based on committees, which is kind of disappointing to me. But that doesn't mean I don't think that when they calculated what we could get on the city council, and it's like 1,016 a month, based on the formula of escalation that they had, so there's money that the city council could be getting, for doing what we do that's allowable under the law, plus benefits. Every other city in this, area gives benefits to its council members. My main goal in doing that was try to give people some incentive to go to meetings, not necessarily to make us rich, but to get some incentives to meetings. There are obviously monies that can legally be spent, but it's a question of how. And since I'm not going to run again, I'm in a better position to kind of argue for increasing compensation a little bit for this kind of thing than other people might be. And I just want to continue to look at it, but at this point in time, since we can't do a committee side, I guess I have to look at other ways if we're going to do this. Got any thoughts, I was just thought a committee stipend would be one way to get a few bucks to the council people, but also give some incentive to show up for those meetings.
Just thought I'd get a couple of minutes to discuss that, just put it on the table. The other item is increasing the number of people in the staff report on that.
Yeah.
Any comments, which wouldn't preclude you from making it tomorrow night either, but the only thing that I would say is that a thing that's missing from your staff report is the other cities don't have that, but they have chief financial officers and people and whole staffs that do different things too. That's not there. Some of them are elected even.
Right.
Is that, any comment you want to make here today?
You know my sentiments, I just think that this is one of the most important things the city does, and it's just totally boring and totally ignored by everybody, and I'd just like to give them some additional participation.
Right, and then in that staff report, it has the process, like the requirements for being appointed, and then the process on how that can occur without it causing any conflicts with, like having proxies on the committee, so.
Why are you so against proxies on the committee, by the way?
It's a violation of the Brown Act. Then essentially you would have a full quorum of the whole city
People
council.
have appointed commissioners all the time.
Right, but that's a separate commission and that can be appealed to the city council. So if that commission, like I say you have a planning commission and each council member appoints a commissioner, they hear it and then there's an appeals process for that to go to the whole city council.
Everything goes to the council though, we have no authority other than just some minor direction on administrative issues.
Right, but if you had the 3 other council members have a proxy on this, it would be essentially the same as having a city council meeting, not a committee meeting.
Well, I think there's an argument to make that people do it all the time,
The only-
commissions.
The argument I have that is different than council meeting. Council meeting makes decisions. We don't make decisions, we make recommendations. So they wouldn't be able to make the recommendation to the council. The only thing is that 3 people on the council then that can't make a decision today to bring it to the council, make a recommendation, can't do it. Because we could say, we don't want to recommend this to the council.
And the other 3 could say
Yeah, but
they
if we say,
do.
yes, we can, then we're going to recommend it. The council still makes the same decision, just as the planning commission. In that, there's not a decision made. But, okay, sometimes it's better to argue here than it is.
Yeah, except for Betsy's not here, and Betsy got to put her foot down and say no proxies on committees, so.
Well, I just don't, the logic doesn't ring, that doesn't mean that I'm the bearer of all logic, but I just don't get the logic. Commissions happen all the time, and there's no point. And not that I care, I just want participation, so if that's the concern somebody might have, I don't care how it gets there, I just like to see more people participate.
I would guess in the defense of Betsy, which you're very often, in the defense of Betsy, in the Brown Act, I mean, there is a specific thing that if, as Dawn has come to one of the meetings, if she's sitting out in the audience, she can't even make facial gestures, she cannot say yes or no, she cannot speak, she cannot do anything, she cannot, I think as the Brown Act says, cannot participate in the meeting, and participation can be
Influencing or anything.
influencing, you idiots or whatever, that's participating in the meeting. And so if another council member can't participate in this meeting, then are they participating by virtue of that individual?
They would be.
being
I'd like to argue the state Supreme Court on that one, but since we're not going to argue against the state Supreme Court,
It would take you a while, you'd be out of office.
All right, then I went over it by 5 minutes on that. Staff comments?
Nothing else.
Nothing? All right, Terry, have a good Christmas. We won't see you, but we'll see the others before then. Have a good Christmas and thank you.
Here. Holly.
So-
Yes, because it's really, I'm gonna bring 2 things.
Before we
Cookies and a coffee bag.
Before we move on, real quickly, timing on getting some sort of an idea, cost allocated, can you come back to us next month and give us some idea of what we might be able to think of in terms of establishing cost accounting?
Sure.
Okay, so that if we do start applying for grants, we will be able to, call an emergency session or whatever it is we need to do, put in
Yeah,
place.
9:24 meetings adjourned.
A87 proof.
And they look at that because she said she makes one of it. And so,
She's making prime rib for her Christmas dinner at home. He asked her what she was bringing to the pot. She said prime rib.
Yeah.